Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New York Law School. I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here. I am also the Director of the Center for New York City and State Law, and it is a great honor to welcome you today. We have a wonderful program to discuss the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Zoning Reform proposal with City Planning Commission Chair and Department of City Planning Director Dan Garodnick. Let's give him a round of applause. Dan will be in conversation for this briefing with Ben Max, the center's program director and executive editor. And I'm proud to say that the center is building upon a 30-year legacy of our Center for New York City Law, which was founded by the Samuel Seabury Professor of Law, Ross Sandler, who is now the founding director of the Center for New York City and State Law. And we have such a great focus on the impact that the city's laws and operations, as well as the state laws and operations, have on the administration of government and the very complex decisions that are made to provide for everyday New Yorkers. I'm proud to be working with such a great team at the new center, and we are going to be offering a much more expanded array of programming in the weeks and months to come, and you'll see a lot of new changes to our publications and the kinds of civic dialogues that we are creating citywide. I'm also proud to say that the school's administration and its board of trustees has been so supportive of putting forward this new initiative. I want to give a special shout out to Ross Moskowitz, a graduate of the class of 1984, who's a member of our board of trustees. Thank you, Ross. You are one of the deans of land use law in this city, and we are proud in real estate, and we are proud that you are here with us today. It's an important discussion that we're having because the City Planning Commission, of which I am a member, has been putting forward a series of critical initiatives. This City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is the third of a trio of initiatives that will make dramatic differences, we believe, in the shape of our city. We have the City of Yes for carbon neutrality, the City of Yes for economic opportunity, and now City of Yes for housing opportunity. The housing crisis is one that is significant and complex in our city. The Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission are but one set of voices that put together proposals, and there are so many different actors. It's a multi-agency response across our city and across levels of government that ultimately can work together using the tools that the City Planning Commission and Department put together to put forward important reforms to our housing crisis. And so we're going to hear from Dan today. Dan is an extraordinary leader. He's someone I've known from our work in city government for well over, I would say, probably 18 years. And he is somebody whose work goes above and beyond. He brings a vision, a care for our city, a love for progress and ensuring that every New Yorker's voice is heard. I'm very proud to be a member of the City Planning Commission and to work with him each and every day. So I will now turn it over to Ben to have a terrific dialogue with Dan.
It's only downhill from here for you. Thank you, Dean Crowell. Thank you all for being here. Really excited about this conversation today at a very consequential moment, which is why we're here today on this date for this proposal. And I'll let you talk about its significance more, but this is a proposal that is the most significant potential changes to the city's land use zoning rules since 1961. And a very consequential set of proposals that the fate of which will be decided by the end of the year, even sooner. So thank you all for being here. Excited to talk. For those that don't know, Dan Garodnick, just very briefly, the director of the New York City Department of City Planning, chair of the City Planning Commission. He leads the department's planning efforts, which include housing-focused policy like some of these zoning reforms, but a lot more as well, as Dean Crowell mentioned. He chairs the commission that reviews other land use applications. Dan is also a former member of the New York City Council. Key context to our conversation here, of course, as this set of zoning changes is now into the city council review, the last step of the land use process here after passing the city planning commission. So anything about your background that you want to add? I'm not going to give your full bio, but you are now the chair of the City Planning Commission, the director of the City Department of City Planning, a former city council member, an attorney, important in these halls.
Right. I think the only thing that you missed in that sequence was the time that I worked at Riverside
Park, sure.
Which was a great experience for me running a not-for-profit organization, also supporting an important public space in New York.
All right, so I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to ask you to give us, for anyone who's not familiar, the sort of 5-minute overview of City of Yes for housing opportunity. But first, before we get that, this whole conversation is happening under extraordinary circumstances. The mayor was indicted less than a week ago. What is your reaction to that in terms of how it affects city government, your work? You've been working on this proposal for years. This came out of the Department of City Planning, has been under discussion and development there even before you came in, different discussions about changing zoning to help spur housing growth. How does this unprecedented time impact your work and your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, clearly we're in uncharted territory here, recognizing the complexity of the moment that we are in, but also a proposal that is very much, as you pointed out, on a long trajectory and a formal path. For those of you less familiar with the process for making land use changes in New York, this has been developed over many years and now formalized into the official process for consideration, which means that it has gone through first a kickoff at the City Planning Commission, then it has been through all 59 community boards and all 5 borough presidents. It had a 15-hour hearing at the City Planning Commission and a vote where it passed at the commission by a vote of 10-3, and now it's on the desk of the City Council. So it is on a path. The challenges that New Yorkers were facing 2 weeks ago are the same challenges that they are facing today that we're trying to address with this proposal, which I'm going to look forward to talking about. So we are full steam ahead.
All right, so give us that overview. City of Yes for housing opportunity, as I said, a sweeping set of zoning reform changes. Give us the planks, the key planks, the vision here, and then we'll dig into some of the specifics that you mentioned.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, I think it's important to set the stage a little bit as to why we are proposing such a big zoning reform in New York City at this moment. We are at a historic low for vacancy in New York City at 1.41% for rental housing. The impact of that affects everybody in this room and beyond. The cost of housing is high. The pressures of gentrification and displacement are real. The imbalance of power between landlords and tenants is palpable. We measured almost 93,000 homeless New Yorkers in December, including about 34,000 kids. Inaction is just not an option here. We need to take bold steps to be able to deal with the crisis that we are in. By the way, this is a crisis that is not 2 or 5 or even 10 years in the making. This has been building for a very, very long time. So we don't need to live this way. We can take real action, which will enable more housing supply, drive down costs for everyone. That is what is behind the reason we have taken such a big bite out of this issue in this way. Now, what is it? What's the proposal? So it is a change to our zoning rules. It is a change to our zoning text. And I always worry about saying the words change to our zoning text because I know that that's where I tend to lose people because people are not super interested in zoning text amendments. But those are the things that actually enable or disable things from happening around the city. We changed it in our 2 prior citywide text amendments, City of Yes for carbon neutrality and economic opportunity, where our own rules were in the way of our goals for sustainability and for economic development. Same is true here for housing. Our restrictive zoning in New York City has created imbalances in New York, and it has created entire neighborhoods and entire swaths of the city that are plainly inaccessible to the creation of housing. Imbalance, 59 community boards. Last year, 10 of them produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. We have neighborhoods in New York City that really are not producing any housing. We, as a city, have to open the door here, allow a little bit more housing in every neighborhood of New York, which will be respectful and modest in individual communities and not have the sort of dramatic changes that people frequently worry about, but also in the aggregate will allow us to add approximately 100,000 units of additional units of housing in the next 15 years. So how do we do it? Low density areas, places where you have 1 or 2 family homes or low multifamily, small multifamily homes in New York City. We are proposing to allow for the reintroduction of buildings that are already in many places, a 3 or a 4 or a 5-story apartment building near transit, above a commercial corridor, a commercial strip. We have a lot of commercial strips, and in zoning, we call them commercial overlays. It's a place where you can do housing, but also where you can do commercial. We think you should be able to have a 3 or a 4 or a 5-story apartment building above a commercial strip. And the reason I say 3, 4, or 5 is that we match the size of those buildings to the existing zoning districts in an effort to try to be respectful of existing communities. For 1 or 2 family homeowners, we want to give them the opportunity to add an accessory unit to their home. This has been great for homeowners around the country. The opportunity for multi-generational families to have additional space for an aging relative or an in-law or whoever, or to help them pay down their mortgage, or to generate some wealth for themselves and their family going forward. 800 square feet on your lot, attic, basement, garage, backyard. We would allow that also in a low density area. Medium and high density areas like the one that we're sitting in today, we would give a bonus for affordable housing, 20% bonus if that 20% is for affordable permanently. We have some citywide proposals related to parking, related to office to residential conversions, and we can go in depth into any of these, but there's your thumbnail. It's a 1,400-page proposal. I've tried to do it in about 3 minutes, but we can go deeper into any of the topics that you want.
That's great. And obviously, folks, if you want more detail on roughly 8 components of the plan, we'll get into some more of the details, but you can find a lot of reporting and writing from our publication here, Cityland, and then others, of course, around the city. A lot of great reporting on this proposal. And if New Yorkers are not familiar with it, it's because they haven't started to look at it yet. And so we're having this briefing, and it is now going to be in the final weeks where we will see more and more New Yorkers really pay attention to it as it comes before the city council. So on that front, on the timeline, it's past the City Planning Commission. It's to the city council now. You are going to be brought in front of the city council sometime this month, your old stomping grounds. You've been there. Right. You've been back to testify before. But there will be probably a very lengthy hearing on this proposal at the city council sometime this month, and then a vote by early December.
Yeah, end of year.
Okay.
Yep.
As you go into this process, you have these roughly 8 planks of the reforms. Can you say, for some of them at least, roughly your estimate of the number of units that you expect them to produce? You said somewhere around 100,000 units over the next 10 to 15 years, added based on these changes, right? So that is, if these are instituted, the sort of bonus from them that is expected in the housing supply from adding these. Do you have a rough estimate on some of them that will be the biggest drivers of that increase in housing supply?
Yeah, I think that, things that open the door in areas that have not produced housing are very significant here, whether it's accessory dwelling units or town center or transit-oriented development. Very important to this proposal because you're enabling housing in places that are just not producing any housing. Had produced housing in history, but we have made it impossible to even recreate those very buildings that exist there. That's important. But also that bonus for affordable also is very significant. If we had that bonus, the 20% bonus for affordable housing over the last decade, we would have had another 20,000 units of housing, affordable housing for New Yorkers, and obviously a very consequential piece of this puzzle.
You quickly mentioned there's a parking proposal.
Oh,
in here.
yeah.
But this is a big deal
For sure.
in terms of your projections for producing that housing. And it's perhaps one of the biggest 1, 2, 3 areas of pushback that you're getting. So say a little bit about the proposal to eliminate parking requirements and how you're trying to convince people that it is not as bad of a thing as some people think it is.
Yes, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad that we can talk about it a little bit because people get very nervous when you start talking about parking. Everybody has a feeling on parking. Either they love parking, they hate parking, they're looking for parking right at that moment. They don't, everybody has a very strong feeling about parking. New York City defines in its zoning resolution precisely the amount of parking that you must provide in every building, in every zoning district, in every community of the city. Some places it's 25% of the homes must have parking spaces. Some places it's 50%. Some places it's 100%, 1 for 1. Every unit of housing gets a parking space. This comes out of the 1950s, 1960s, where the car culture was everything, and the city felt like it was important to prescribe specifically and mandate specifically those minimum numbers required for parking in housing. What we have seen over time is that those mandates are coming, in some cases, directly in conflict with housing. Not in every case, but in some cases, they're directly conflicting with our desire to create housing in New York City. And so what we have proposed to do here is to eliminate the mandate. So if you want to include parking in your development, that's fine. If you don't want to include parking in your development because you're right on top of a subway, that's fine. And if you have parking today and want to keep it, that's fine too. So we are enabling a little bit more flexibility in our housing policy. We're not creating a cap. We're not creating any mandate. We're eliminating a mandate. And I will tell you, and Dean Crowell and I sitting on the commission, we see this frequently with applications that come before us, people who are seeking special waivers to be free of the parking requirement because they are very close to mass transit and don't think that they need to include parking in their development, would rather do housing. We regularly grant that relief, but not after somebody spent 2 years and a couple $100,000 of expense and time to be able to go through that process. And at the same time, we very regularly see developments going well above the mandatory minimum. So we feel very confident that by eliminating the mandate, we will continue to see parking where it is needed, but also not continue to require it in places where it plainly is not.
There's the opportunity to do all sorts of jigsaw puzzling here with any of these proposals. So the idea isn't necessarily either you remove all the parking mandates or you don't. There could be modifications to where there are parking requirements with new development, and there could be all sorts of formulaic changes, adjustments. But if you were to take that part out, do you know how many units that might cost you in your roughly 100,000?
Not offhand, but and I don't think that we have a specific number for that. But we can come back to you with whatever detail that we have.
These roughly 8 planks of the proposal, including that one maybe especially, relate to the others. Is there a way you can describe how important it is that they go together? Is parking the number one thing that then helps enable several of the others, not all, but several? Is that the linchpin to sort of making it work?
I don't think so. They're each important. The parking piece is important, but not the linchpin to all of the things. It's important as a matter of policy for us to get out of the way of housing. And parking requirements do impact frequently what is being built around the city. I mean, you ask architects who work regularly in New York City, and you say, well, how do you start? How do you get moving on a project? First, they figure out how much parking they need to provide, and then they design a building around that. That's not the way that we should be designing buildings in New York City in places where you don't really need parking. parts of the city where you have, transit deserts and places where you do not have mass transit in the immediate midst, well, you better provide parking there, or else you're not going to have any renters or purchasers within your building. So it's important, but it is not the linchpin. Each of these has the ability to stand on its own.
Before going further on parking or any other specifics, address a little bit what to me has been sort of the two very contradictory big criticisms of this plan. One is you have people saying this is going to destroy our sort of suburban style neighborhoods. This is a threat to single family zoning areas, 1-2 family houses, districts. And the other is this isn't going to make a difference in the affordability crisis of the city. How do you square that you're getting both of those, or that it's not going to make enough of a difference, I should say, and your sort of brief response to both?
Well, when you put out a proposal and some people say you're going too big and some of the people say you're going too small, I think that you at least can reflect on that and feel some level of confidence that you have proposed something somewhere in the middle. And that was, of course, our desire here. And that was why we proposed to do it in the way that we did. A little more housing in every neighborhood without dramatic changes that people frequently worry about, the sort of taxing of infrastructure that people are frequently concerned about, while also enabling a fair amount of housing in the aggregate for New York City. But I have taken note of that. I do not think that this has such a negative impact on any community. And I think that if you fairly look at the proposal, you would see that. The reintroduction of, at the maximum, a 5-story building in places which already have multifamily buildings, that's not a radical concept. It is about re-legalizing a building typology which has been made functionally impossible through our zoning rules over time.
Let me just jump in there. I grew up in Whitestone and Flushing, and there are much bigger apartment buildings all over that area. Now, there's many blocks and neighborhoods where there aren't apartment buildings. There's 1- and 2-family homes in a lot of areas, but there's large apartment buildings. When you talk to people and you're getting this pushback from areas like that, where there's some of the strongest opposition to this plan, but others as well, is there any response when you say, we're just legalizing some of what's already around you? There was an effort made to sort of restrict growth, and we need to sort of open that up. Are there any aha moments for people when they look around their neighborhoods and say, oh, we won't even have apartment buildings that big coming in under this proposal?
For people who are fairly considering this proposal, the answer is yes. An objective look at this proposal, and in neighborhoods like the ones that you described, where there are existing multifamily buildings of a significant scale, even bigger than what we're proposing, an objective look at that would come to the conclusion, aha, I see what you're trying to do, and it is not something that radically changes this community. In fact, it very much fits in with this community. On the other hand, there are many people who do not want to see change. They don't want to open the door. And there's a lot of misinformation about the proposal that has been moving around the city about what this would mean, what you have to worry about, and what we are actually after. But the short answer, and that's disappointing, but the short answer to your question is yes. When people see what we are proposing, there is an understanding of the fact that it is very much in the context of New York City and very much in the context of our low-density areas today.
Are the biggest pieces of misinformation the idea that this would usher in Manhattan-sized buildings all over the city? Is that the biggest piece? Or
yes, I mean that's I think the worry. People say what you're going to put, 432 Park Avenue in Douglaston. No, we're not doing that. Mm-hmm. We are enabling modest multifamily buildings in places where they are well recognized, already established, and doing it in a way that is fitting with the context of the neighborhood. It's an important distinction. Some people say this is a one-size-fits-all. We shouldn't be doing something citywide. It is the opposite of a one-size-fits-all proposal. It is directly tailored to individual zoning districts in every neighborhood around the city. And when people are fairly looking at that, they see that.
The other side, it's not going to do enough. 100,000 units more over 10 to 15 years, helpful in the city's shortage and the city's affordable housing crisis, but not a big game changer. Your response to that, and also as part of that, I mean, this is not the city's affordable housing plan, right? This is a zoning reform plan. I mean, I'm starting your answer, but how does this fit into other pieces is the second piece of it?
Yes, this is a piece, not the only piece of the ability to create housing. Also, we're talking about 100,000 units over 15 years, but zoning is an enabling statute. It's enabling opportunity, which tends to live on. And we're talking about the zoning resolution of 1961. So we will be talking about the zoning resolution of 2024 for the next 60 years or longer. This is something which puts New York City on a trajectory in the way that we should be, and that will allow small incremental growth over time, which will significantly aid us in the crisis that we are in. But for those who say, well, you know what, you should have gone bigger. We're in a big crisis. You should have gone bigger. I just encourage you to go ahead and make your voices known as this process winds through the political process, because I recognize the complexity of advancing and passing the proposal that I have. So if people feel that we should have gone further, I think you should go ahead and say that. That's okay by me.
And say a little bit more about how it does fit into other pieces. You got changes at the state level passed this year, a new tax incentive to create multifamily apartment buildings, a lifting of the floor area ratio cap, and some other proposals at the state level that got through. The governor's big, ambitious housing compact wasn't even on the table this year. That was removed. That would be very helpful to the city's efforts to create more housing, but that was off the table. But how does it fit into some of these other pieces, or even some of the other things you're doing at city planning that to take a bigger bite out of this problem need to happen?
In short, it's really helpful. What the state did this year on those areas that you just described and others was very helpful for us as it relates to the creation of housing, starting first and foremost with the re-upping of a tax incentive for the creation of housing, 485X, which partners very, very nicely with the piece of this proposal that is the bonus for affordable housing. Finally, the lifting of the cap on residential development in New York City. Many of you know New York City has been subject to an artificial cap on the amount of housing we can develop on a specific site. It's called the floor area ratio cap, and it was a mathematical equation limited to 12. The state lifted that. And in this proposal, we haven't discussed that yet. We actually create the tools to use that opportunity. So for a future potential development that wishes to be a more dense residential building than a 12 FAR building, we create those tools here. Also, they created an incentive for office to residential conversion. And that has a requirement, if you take advantage of the incentive, of affordable units being included in your conversion from office to residential, which partners very well with the piece of this puzzle, which includes that flexibility for offices to be able to convert to residential. So the state action this year was really important. And state action generally is really important to what actually happens in the creation of housing in New York City. We can change the dial on zoning, but somebody actually needs to make the decision individually that they are going to do something. The state tax incentive and these other changes really help for us to picture success even after we make these changes.
One of those changes in the zoning amendment is this idea of allowing a lot more buildings in the city, office buildings, to be eligible for conversion. You have now the state program. You would allow a lot more buildings to be potentially converted from office to residential. Are you getting is there any pushback on that? That seems like almost universally, one of the most popular parts of this is the idea that post-COVID, we've got office vacancy issues.
Well, you're right to observe that this is a popular part of the proposal. I like to think they're all popular, but this one is
They're not.
particularly popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. But the reason why I think that this has captured people's attention is we have a 19% vacancy rate in our commercial office buildings and a 1.41% vacancy rate in our rental housing stock. So you merge those things and it rationally feels like, hey, come out of COVID, make some reasonable, responsible changes to allow for more flexibility for office buildings. That sure makes sense. It's an important part of the proposal. We want to allow for geographic areas that previously have not been able to convert from office or other to residential to be able to do that. We want to change the date of eligibility for buildings from what has been primarily 1961, except down here in Lower Manhattan where it's 1977, and move that date to 1991 for eligibility of buildings. So we want to create a little more flexibility here. We will enable another 130 plus million square feet of commercial office space to be eligible for conversion. That's more office space than even exists in the city of Philadelphia. We do not expect it all to convert to housing, but we think that at this moment, it is prudent for us to enable that opportunity, both for the sake of the buildings and also for the housing potential that it creates for us.
I know you're playing with the hand you're dealt. You came in as city planning director and chair of the commission with a lot to navigate historically, presently, political. But that one and others just remind me of how complicated this all is. And you're making adjustments on parking. You're trying to just remove the minimum requirements. So there's some ways in which you're really trying to sort of both take a scalpel and then also be a little more blunt. On the issue of the office conversions, it strikes me to say, oh, you're going to move it to 1991. Why move it to 1991? Why not just make all office buildings eligible or make it more, 2015 or something?
Yep, it's an important question. We studied this with stakeholders, experts, people who were in the field, tenant advocates. Over the course of a year, actually, the city council passed a law that required the city to study this, and I chaired this task force in the calendar year of 2022. And we looked at all of the limitations, the ones that were most important, that were keeping offices from being able to convert. The date of eligibility and the geography were top of the list. You might say, well, why don't you just enable any building today? Well, we go through a process to approve buildings, and we have zoning that is in effect today. And there is an expectation as to what that means today. So if you allow for somebody to come in with a proposal for a commercial office building, then immediately pivot to housing, well, that is inconsistent with what we have studied in our environmental review. It's inconsistent what the expectation is of the surrounding neighborhood. We thought a roughly 30-year time horizon for that made sense. So we did not want to have things change immediately or go through a process pretending to be one thing and then immediately decide to be something else. There is a level of flexibility in zoning. You can do multiple things in different zoning districts, but that was one that we thought, you know what, if you're in as an office building, you're in as an office building, and if you were built before 1991, okay, we're going to afford you a little bit more flexibility.
We were half joking a moment ago about the popularity of the different pieces. It is pretty notable, and I want to know what you make of this, that you got as much support as you did from community boards, which are notoriously sort of anti-change, anti-growth in a lot of ways. Community boards largely often made up of people who already are stably housed, are homeowners, are car owners, et cetera. What do you attribute that to? There is a geographic breakdown there that most of your support on this from community boards was Manhattan and sort of downtown Brooklyn waterfront centric. But why do you think you got as much support as you did? Did that surprise you? And were there areas of the city beyond that that you feel like are sort of gettable now that you have to get their city council members to go along with this while they are taking into consideration the feedback from their community boards?
Well, we were definitely encouraged by what we saw at the community boards, and obviously the seriousness with which boards took this proposal for the most part, and the response that we got. I mean, just to put that in context, there were 18 boards that voted yes on this proposal with some level of conditions. And the last time that we had a housing-related proposal that was citywide and that went to community boards was in 2016. It was in the days when I was in the city council. It was for the creation of MIH, so our mandatory affordability program, and ZQA, which was a proposal that actually changed some parking rules and allowed for certain bonuses for certain types of affordable housing for seniors and things like that. For MIH, 9 boards were in favor of it. So that was just to create the tools for mandatory affordable housing, 9 boards. And for ZQA, the one that created a bonus for senior affordable housing and changed some parking rules, 6 boards were for that. So the short answer is yes, I was very encouraged that we did as well as we did at the boards, while recognizing that there were a lot of boards who were very concerned about what it might mean for them. And I understand that, and it will be incumbent upon us at the Department of City Planning to make the case to council members as to why this is not only mission critical for the city's general health, but why it is very much within the character of their existing community, and why, even though there are lots of fears about change, why this will not have radical change in their neighborhood. And we're going to have that conversation. We're going to have it right now. It's going to be very public, and it's going to be interesting. And we're going to call the question on a very big issue in New York City by the end of this calendar year. But it is really important. It's important for us to have that conversation. It's important for us to make the distinctions to the council about what was a misinterpretation at the boards, and do our best to make our case.
As it moved through the City Planning Commission, you removed the possibility of more new housing development on NYCHA campuses.
We were going to give a little bit more flexibility for NYCHA campuses. As a result of feedback that we got, we decided to leave the delicate balance that we have on NYCHA for infill development alone. We decided to make some other changes on campus development to make sure that any new development that's taking advantage of our more flexible rules was contextual and height limited. And we also allowed for some vesting. There's concerns that we're changing rules. There are people who are midstream on their projects, and we did not want to take something away when somebody's midstream. That's not government working at its very best. So we allowed for some level of vesting for projects that are already underway. Those were the changes we made at the commission. And of course, the city council has the power to accept it in full, reject it in full, or make modifications of its own, provided those modifications are within the scope of what we studied in the environmental review and that what's in scope of the land use process. But they have a fair amount of flexibility to make changes here.
As you just got at, this idea of more flexibility for housing development on NYCHA is part of the larger sort of campus part of this, which applies to educational institutions and others, religious institutions that might want to build housing on land that they own, which very often is underutilized. On this NYCHA piece, seeming that this is a massive amount of New York City, and also the potential for new housing amid other housing that already exists. Just take us a little bit more inside that decision. Was this something that the powers that be at NYCHA asked you to pull, or weren't they more supportive of keeping it? And this was just, sort of concerns about, they have a lot of things, a lot of programs in motion there. We're not going to upset the apple.
I really think it was more the latter. And we heard that from elected officials. We heard it from some boards. We heard it from some borough presidents about the balance that exists for NYCHA to be able to do infill development on their campuses. There is a process for it. Other campuses do not have that same process because they are not NYCHA. So there was a distinction to be made there, and it was an area in which we thought, okay, well, that does not do too much harm to the proposal because there is a process for NYCHA to do this. Other campuses don't have that. We wanted to keep those in play. The church parking lot is a really interesting example. There are campuses that have, we say campuses, you picture a college campus, but a campus could be a lot of things. It can be something like tower in the park buildings with space that a cooperative wants to do a development to reduce the overall costs of the neighborhood on the corner. It could be a church with a parking lot with development rights, but they can't use because of our existing zoning rules as they relate to campuses. It can be a variety of things. And we continue to enable almost all of those, but we thought it was sensible to peel NYCHA off at this point based on some of the feedback that we heard.
You have got a lot of support from borough presidents. You also got some concerns. Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso wants you to go further. He wants you to put in parking maximums while removing minimums. Borough President Levine also very supportive. You got some pushback from Borough President Donovan Richards, Borough President Vanessa Gibson about specific pieces. Anything you heard from a borough president that is most top of mind as you go into the city council's negotiations? Borough President Richards talking about the concerns in a lot of parts of Queens about the ADU proposal. Borough President Gibson about the parking one. Obviously on Staten Island, Borough President Fasella very, very against virtually all of this. But anything you heard from those borough presidents that's most top of mind now?
I mean, the things that you just mentioned are definitely important here to keep an eye on as it relates to the borough president recommendations. They are reflective of not just their community boards, but their council members and their boroughs writ large. So when they, put a flag on a particular piece of the proposal, you can bet we're going to be having a conversation about those pieces of the proposal at the council. That's healthy. That's good. That's how it's supposed to be. We'll make our case. We recognize that there are concerns about different parts of this. And at the end of the day, it is incumbent upon the council to navigate all of those questions and come to a responsible and important result in the interest of dealing with this crisis. But the short answer is yes, the ones that you mentioned, ADUs, parking, I definitely will expect to be part of this conversation at the council.
Well, let's get into those just a little bit more in a moment. But as we get into these city council negotiations, one of the most important pieces in a mayoral administration initiative getting through the city council in a very sort of complicated, difficult way is mayoral political capital. The mayor has very little of that right now. How do you, broadly speaking, get this done in the city council? Whose voices become more important here in the political process? Speaking of Borough President Reynoso, I just had him on my podcast and he said, I'm ready to be even more of a champion for this right now. But given the political playing field right now, how does something, even with modifications that are almost certain to happen, how does it actually get through? Because it doesn't seem right now in this moment like a guarantee that this moves through in even some form.
Well, here is
disagree, obviously.
Yeah, well, here's the reason why I think that you should feel some level of optimism about this proposal, even at this moment in time. The city council has been very clear about its priorities as it relates to housing supply. It passed a law just a couple of years ago which requires the city to put actual targets and estimates district by district with an effort to do exactly what we are doing in this proposal to rebalance the imbalance that exists today for housing creation in New York City. The Speaker has made it clear that housing supply, the creation of affordable housing, is a priority for her. Individual council members have made it clear that this is an important priority. When I say this, housing creation is an important priority for them. And this is a proposal that is a serious proposal that is being presented to them in a way that is on a path, it is on a track, and they have the ability to take ownership of this, to modify it based on their own priorities, the political environment that they are in, and the need recognized by them to create a lot of housing in New York City to be able to deal with the affordability crisis that we are in. So to me, that is a serious moment for serious people to rise up and make the case as to why this deserved to pass 6 months ago. It deserves to pass now. Nothing has changed substantively. These problems have been decades in the making, and this is a moment. I appreciated what Borough President Reynoso said. That's great. He and others will step up and move this thing forward as we get closer to the end zone here, and we're very, very encouraged by that.
Very often, things with a citywide outlook come into this process and they start getting just carved and chopped. Both the mayor and the speaker have talked about the importance of more housing everywhere. The central tenet of this thing is a little more housing in every neighborhood. How do you avoid going into this process with the city council and having lots of carve-outs for very different pieces in different districts, or is that just part of the political process and we should expect a whole bunch of that?
I mean, I think we're going to continue to make our case that this is a responsible and respectful proposal that creates a significant amount of housing while not doing harm in individual neighborhoods. The speaker and the council will do what they do best, which is take a very complicated proposal, socialize it among 51 members of a variety of different interests and goals and priorities, and come out with a result that works, that passes, that is something that moves the needle on housing in New York City. And that's the process. That's okay. Like we embrace that. That is what we are going to do next here. The end result, I can't predict which of these pieces, if any, is taken out, what the end result precisely looks like. But I do know that it has been very clear from a lot of members of the council, borough presidents, the speaker herself, that this sort of a thing is a high priority for them. So I have confidence that the council will take a very serious look at this and do what they do best, sort it out, and come to a positive result.
Do you think you can avoid a situation where a lot of the communities that you mentioned 10 community board districts, as much housing as the other 49 combined? And do you think structure a negotiation here that is not going to simply allow some of those community districts represented by council members to just remove themselves from this broader sort of citywide obligation that you're pushing for? I
mean, the point of the proposal, as you correctly said, is a little bit in every neighborhood. That is central to the proposal, and it's central to the priorities that the council itself has set out. But we also live in a world in which you have 51 members, and we're going to need to pass the proposal. The speaker and her team are very able and committed to sorting through complicated issues such as these. And I have confidence. We at the Department of City Planning will be support to them. This is a technical process. It is, is deep in the weeds and a lot of, components of this. We will be support to them and to individual members and to individual members in their communities, however they need. It's really important for us to fulfill that role, but particularly right now. So we are very committed to that.
As we talk about some in our final couple of questions for me, and we'll just take a couple quick audience questions in our final 10 minutes soon, but there are going to be various specific negotiations. You mentioned mandatory inclusionary housing. A change to the zoning resolution can't include certain things, but can come with political deals around capital infrastructure and a whole bunch of other things that come with it. So in terms of the things that you're thinking about, the pieces of the sort of negotiations that are on the table, what do you think is in that bucket that could sort of come as part of a bigger negotiation and deal around this? Things that, people talk about are either a pilot or a fuller blown residential parking permit program, if you're going to change parking. You know, you could do a residential parking permit program to help put people's mind at ease that they'll find parking in their neighborhoods with a permit. More capital infrastructure planning that becomes part of the city's capital budget process. There's obviously all sorts of potential alterations, as we've discussed, to the specifics of the zoning proposal, removing ADUs, parking, et cetera. But what do you see as sort of some of these big pieces that are on the negotiating table here as you enter this?
I think I won't get ahead of the process itself with that, because I think the council is asking itself and members those very questions now. But what I can say is we are ready to have this conversation with them in a thoughtful way. You know, we know that this is big, it is complicated, it is important, and it has, you know, our complete attention to be support to the council as they navigate this proposal, and also to think about the other things that they may need or want to advocate for as part of this conversation. But the short answer is we're about to have that conversation with them.
Short answer is I'm not telling this room of people what I say. We'll just take a couple quick audience questions if there's microphones here. So just if you want to go to the microphone, we'll just take one or two on each side. I'm sorry if there's a lot of questions here we won't get to, but you can submit them to the Department of City Planning. So go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Tony Peterson. I live in Brooklyn. And when I travel through the streets, all I see is construction. So I'm trying to figure out what program do we have now that we have all this construction and all this, every little slot they're putting in a house or some sort of housing. And my second question is about parking. You can't get a spot in New York City anywhere. And the people's emotions get involved, and I can see a lot of fighting,
Conflict, yeah.
over, and the car share. Now, how did that play into what's going on in the streets? The buses, people are double parking in the buses. You can't go around.
Forgive me, I'm gonna let him answer so we can get to just a few questions.
The short answer to the first piece is the fact that there is an amount of housing being created today does not obviate the need for us to create a whole lot more. So we are not keeping up. Obviously, we are creating some amount of units of housing every single year. The proposal is about the incremental addition that we want to create to be able to deal with this crisis. So the idea that you would see a crane, that you'd see a construction site, of course, does not surprise me. We are seeing development of housing today. We just need to do a whole lot more of that. As it relates to parking, you know, my point stands, which is obviously there are some very congested neighborhoods. There are some very difficult neighborhoods where it's hard to find a place to park. My expectation here is this is not a question of land use mandates. There are broader questions about mass transit, the double parking of the buses. There are questions about, you know, what neighborhoods absolutely must have parking in their developments, and also similarly and importantly, which neighborhoods do not. And we just don't want to force it where it is absolutely not needed.
Please.
Andrew Sessa, Brooklyn homeowner. I was victimized by Sandy, and it took a long time to have my home rebuilt, was elevated. And I was looking for an apartment while they were elevating the home, and I found dozens of landlords who would not accept me because they were warehousing their property. I find it ridiculous that we're talking about something like this when they have a tax write-off for warehousing that property. Would it be better to just go after that, get rid of that tax write-off?
Thank you.
So the short answer is our city's housing department has looked very closely at where we are. And there may be some amount of what you described, but we are in a crisis. We are lower than we have ever been on vacancy. So I don't want to take anything away from what you just said, but we also, or anything away from the construction sites, we are also in a crisis. So we need to create a lot more housing than we have today. We need to find opportunities for people to be able to negotiate with their landlords when they're being asked to pay an exorbitant increase in their rent. We need for people to have better bargaining power when they're renters and they need a repair and somebody's telling them, sorry, I'm not going to do that for you. Where are you going to go? We need to rebalance the power between landlords and tenants, but we're at an extremely low vacancy rate, the lowest since 1968, and that's really what we're trying to deal with.
Thanks, Patrick Sposter. I wanted to follow up on the complicated political dynamics at play here, given the mayor's indictment, especially since the mayor has kind of like used this city of yes as a catchphrase. I'm wondering how you evaluate the prospects for city council given those circumstances and sort of in providing kind of the support and advocacy for the policy. And as it goes through city council, I'm wondering if it changes how you kind of present it or communicate about it in perhaps trying, are you distancing yourself from the mayor? Because I feel like there are also perhaps city council members of the public that might agree with this on policy grounds, but also not be wanting to be seen as giving the mayor a big win in this circumstance. So how do you evaluate
the proposal?
You stole a follow-up question directly from my preparation. Go ahead.
The fact that this proposal so clearly aligns with the priorities of the council, has the support of 4 borough presidents, and directly deals with a crisis that everybody sees, that is the reason why we are going to be successful here. I don't take away anything from the complexity of the moment that we are in, but a proposal like this is bigger than this moment. A proposal like this has been building for years and is directly designed to deal with a problem that New Yorkers want us to deal with. So we are full steam ahead. We will work with the council. We will find a way to get this done.
We're going to hit these last 3 as quick, please, rapid fire so we can get all 3 of you in. Go ahead, please.
Hi. So you talked about increasing the land use to 3, 4, 5. So my family owns a lot in the Bronx, just like 3 blocks from a train station that's currently zoned for a 2-story, 4-unit semi-attached townhouse. If City of Yes passes, would we be able to build higher?
Very possibly. I want to make sure that I'm not missing a detail, so don't take this as legal advice. But if you are within a half-mile of transit, which sounds like you are, and you are on a wide street, 75 feet or more, or you are on the short end of a block, then you have the opportunity at a 5,000 square foot lot, then you have the opportunity to take advantage of what we call our transit-oriented development proposal, which might mean for you 3, 4, or 5 stories residential. So we should have a look.
There are at least 20 people in this room that can answer your question, so stick around.
Thank you.
Hi, Mary Conway Spiegel, lifelong New Yorker. I was just in a CB2 meeting 2 nights ago. We're looking at the Tony Dapolito Recreation Center. One thing you have not addressed is landmark status versus City of Yes. The city has neglected, we think purposely, the Tony Dapolito Center, which is landmarked citywide and statewide, and may even be national landmark. The city is now claiming it's so derelict that they cannot fix it. They've been ignoring this facility for several years. Long story. Anyway, the fight between landmark status and City of Yes is real, especially in the Greenwich Village area. How do you address that? And how do you address the negligence of the city regarding Parks Department's vow to fix things and then purposely not fix them so development for affordable housing can come in?
Well, thank you. And if I may address the ones that I think that I can address, which are the questions of City of Yes and landmarks, as opposed to the parks question, because I'm not sure that I can answer the Dapolito question. I actually don't see a conflict between this proposal and landmarks. There's nothing about this proposal which touches a landmark status, nor does it impede a landmark district. To the contrary, it actually is to the benefit of landmark buildings, because many landmark buildings, which themselves are stuck with air rights that they cannot use because they are landmarks, have had very scant ability to be able to transfer those air rights over the last 50 years because we've made it so difficult for them to do that. In fact, there have only been about 15 special permit applications over the last 50 years for landmarks looking to do that. We're going to make that a little easier for landmarks to be able to transfer their own development rights. So to me, I see that as a benefit of actual landmark buildings, which I want to see succeed. I want them to be able to make the repairs that they need and also to have a little bit more flexibility. But this proposal does not touch the landmarking status of a building or a district.
Last one, and then stick around for hour 2, where we talk about your role on the MTA board.
Oh, God.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Last one, please.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the 20% universal affordability preference bonus. There are a number of existing programs. Some of them are voluntary, some are mandatory, some are in the tax code. But I think everybody is kind of familiar with the concept of requiring a percentage set aside for affordable housing. Can you talk about why you think how what's being proposed is different from the existing practice and why you think it's better?
Yeah, so today we have a couple of ways that we're securing affordable housing in New York City that's separate from, let's say, a city finance building that's 100% affordable. We have the scenario in which somebody is coming to us for more development rights. They want to change the zoning. That's where we map MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing. You must provide a certain percentage of your units as affordable. We also have voluntary programs, which are allow you to get an extra bonus if you wish in exchange for delivering some level of affordable housing. It can be off-site, it can be on-site. We are changing this here to have that program, that voluntary program, have a much tighter ratio of market rate to affordable so that we get more affordable units. And we are prioritizing on-site affordable housing. It is important for our fair housing goals for us to have affordable housing in high income areas, high amenity areas, places with great access to transit. We want to make sure that we are delivering affordable housing in central areas of the city. And that is the biggest change that we are making as part of our universal affordability preference.
Thank you to Dan Garodnick for being here today. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and please stay tuned for our future events at the Center for New York City and State Law. Thank you.